We would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we meet to share these conversations on the Vegan Compass podcast.
We extend our respect to elders past and present, as well as any of our listeners and guests. Hello and welcome to the Vegan Compass podcast, unveiling truths, inspiring change. We are your hosts, Rick Allport and Mackenzie Cross.
From wherever you're listening, please be sure to like and subscribe to support this podcast. Now to the episode.
Welcome to the Vegan Compass podcast news of the week, the show where we navigate the headlines, calling out injustice and celebrating progress for animals and the planet. I'm Rick Allport. I'm here with my co-host, Mackenzie Cross.
Thanks, Rick. It's great to be here with all of you listening. This week, we've got a mix of stories that highlight the ongoing struggles and some surprising shifts in the world of animal rights and veganism.
That's right. From the horrifying story of a zookeeper who tragically lost his life in a lion enclosure to another greyhound trainer banned for baiting offences, it's been a heavy week for some.
But there's hope too. We'll also talk about a multi-million-dollar company stepping into the vegan world with some game-changing news, and a restaurant chain that seems to have lost its way after abandoning veganism.
As always, we're here to unpack these stories, bring you the truth behind the headlines, and bring the focus on what matters most, the lives of sentient beings.
So settle in for a conversation that's equal parts hard-hitting and hopeful, because we've got a lot to talk about.
Let's start with a story that's both tragic and infuriating. A zookeeper at Lion Park in Uzbekistan lost his life in the most horrifying way imaginable after recklessly entering a lion enclosure to impress his girlfriend.
Rick, this story is a brutal reminder of the sheer stupidity of treating wild animals as if they're playthings. This man walked into a lion's cage, taunted them, and then ignored every warning sign when they became visibly agitated.
While his actions were undeniably foolish, the bigger issue here is why these lions were in the cages in the first place. These magnificent, powerful animals were confined to a space that stripped them of their natural habitats, leaving them stressed and defensive.
Exactly. Zoos claim to be about conservation or education, but what we see time and again is exploitation. These animals are reduced to nothing more than props for human entertainment. And when things go wrong, like in this case, it's often the animals that pay the ultimate price.
That's what's so tragic here. Not only did this man lose his life, but one of these lions was killed as well. It's a no-win situation. These lions didn't ask to be imprisoned, and they don't ask to be provoked.
And yet they're the ones who suffer. Wild animals belong in the wild, not in cages, not in zoos, and certainly not in situations where they're forced to interact with people who don't respect their power or their autonomy.
The worst part is that incidents like this are entirely preventable. If these lions were in a sanctuary, or better yet, in their natural habitat, this wouldn't have happened. The real tragedy is how normalized it's become to imprison animals for profit, and the devastating consequences that follow.
So while the headlines may focus on the shocking details of this man's death, let's not lose sight of the bigger issue. This is yet another example of why we need to rethink our relationship with wild animals and dismantle the zoo industry entirely.
Agreed, Mackenzie. If this story tells us anything, it's that we have a long way to go in respecting animals for who they are, not as entertainment, but as sentient beings deserving of freedom and dignity.
Moving on to another disturbing story, this time from the greyhound racing industry in Australia. A trainer in Victoria has been suspended for alleged baiting offences after an investigation by Greyhound Racing Victoria's Integrity Unit.
Mackenzie, this is the latest example of why the greyhound industry is inherently cruel and needs to be abolished. While it's good to see an investigation and swift action, we have to ask, how many more instances of abuse need to surface before the government says enough is enough?
For those unfamiliar, baiting often involves using live animals as lures to train greyhounds. It's a horrific practice that causes unimaginable suffering for the animals used as bait and reinforces the cycle of exploitation and abuse for the greyhounds themselves.
And let's not pretend this is an isolated incident. The industry's long history is littered with scandals, whether it's baiting, doping, or the mass killing of greyhounds deemed too slow to race. These are not exceptions, they're symptoms of an inherently exploitative system.
The fact that this trainer's actions might also lead to charges under the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act shows how severe these allegations are. But honestly, Rick, how can we believe in zero-tolerance policies when these kinds of offences keep happening?
That's the issue, Mackenzie. The greyhound racing industry is built on the backs of animals who have no say in their exploitation. These dogs are bred for profit, kept in often appalling conditions, and discarded when they're no longer useful. Baiting is just one of the many horrors in an industry that should not exist.
Let's not forget the human cost either. The gambling tied to greyhound racing ruins lives, while governments and organisations continue to prop up this industry with funding and promotion. The whole system is rotten.
Exactly. Every greyhound race represents suffering, whether it's the lives of the dogs themselves or the countless other animals exploited and abused in the process. There's no way to reform an industry like this. The only answer is to shut it down completely.
This suspension might look like progress, but it's just a drop in the ocean. Until greyhound racing is banned entirely, animals will continue to suffer and trainers will find ways to exploit the system.
It's up to all of us to demand change, whether that's by supporting bans on greyhound racing, calling out government complicity, or simply educating others about the cruelty behind the sport. We all have a role to play.
Absolutely. If you're listening and you care about animals, don't stay silent. Speak up, take action, and help bring an end to the systemic cruelty of greyhound racing.
Let's switch gears to some uplifting news, something that really highlights the shift we're seeing toward a more compassionate and sustainable world. Unilever, a multi-billion-dollar corporation, is now promoting plant-based diets as a game changer for the planet, our health, and the food system.
That's right, Rick. This is a massive deal because Unilever owns some of the biggest household brands like Dove, Lipton, and Axe. While the company's history with animal testing and non-vegan products has been plain to see, it's clear that even corporations of this size can't ignore the momentum behind veganism.
Amanda Suri, Unilever's president, contributed a piece to the Huffington Post that highlights the overwhelming evidence supporting plant-based diets. She touched on everything from reducing greenhouse gas emissions to improving public health. And honestly, Mackenzie, it's about time major corporations started acknowledging what activists and researchers have been saying for years.
Absolutely. Let's talk about the stats for a moment. A single person going vegan can save over 4,000 litres of water and 30 square feet of land every single day. That's not just a small impact, it's monumental. And with factory farming responsible for up to a third of the world's fresh water consumption, the environmental argument for veganism is impossible to ignore.
It's not just the environment either. Dr. Neil Barnard pointed out that food-related illnesses like heart disease and cancer are now the leading causes of death in the United States. Switching to a plant-based diet isn't just good for the planet, it's literally saving lives.
And then there's the issue of global food insecurity. Right now, we're feeding so much grain to farmed animals that could instead be feeding millions of people directly. Think about that. The resources we use to sustain animal agriculture could alleviate hunger for over 840 million people worldwide.
It's staggering, isn't it? The system is so skewed toward meat and dairy consumption that it actively provides the most vulnerable people of food and water. And yet, the tide is turning. When a company as influential as Unilever starts supporting plant-based diets, it's a signal that this movement is no longer fringe. It's becoming mainstream.
Of course, we still need to approach this news with cautious optimism. Unilever has a long way to go to fully embrace veganism, especially considering their history with animal testing and other exploitative practices. But the fact that they're publicly advocating for plant-based diets means they recognise that the world is shifting.
And that's the takeaway here, Mackenzie. This isn't just about one company. It's about a broader cultural shift. As consumers demand more sustainable and ethical options, corporations have no choice but to adapt or risk becoming irrelevant.
It's proof that every plant-based meal, every conversation about veganism, and every documentary we share is making a difference. The world is changing, and stories like this are proof that we're heading in the right direction.
Let's keep pushing for a future where compassion is the norm, not the exception. And if Unilever can embrace that vision, there's hope for other companies to follow suit.
Our next story comes from California, where a once beloved vegan restaurant chain, Sage Regenerative Kitchen and Brewery, has closed its doors after 14 years. Rick, this isn't just a story about financial struggles. It's about a betrayal that cuts deep for the vegan community.
That's right, Mackenzie. Sage was a safe haven for vegans, a place where people could enjoy cruelty-free meals without compromise. But last year, the owners made the shocking decision to add meat and cheese to the menu in an attempt to save the business. It was marketed under the guise of regenerative farming, but for many, it was nothing more than a betrayal of their core values.
And it didn't take long for the backlash to follow. Loyal customers felt hurt and betrayed. Review after review called out Sage for turning its back on the animals, its mission, and its community. People made it clear, you can't build a business on vegan principles and then suddenly serve bison burgers without consequences.
Exactly. It's not about the food, it's about trust. Vegan customers supported Sage because they believed in its mission. When the restaurant abandoned these principles for profit, it wasn't just a menu change, it was a betrayal of the very animals they claimed to protect.
Let's not gloss over the so-called regenerative farming angle. While it may sound like a more ethical approach to animal agriculture, it's still animal agriculture. Animals are still being raised and killed for profit. Dressing it up with buzzwords doesn't change the reality.
Sage's closure was met with mixed emotions, but a lot of the vegan community saw it as karmic justice. Peter's comment on their Instagram post summed it up perfectly. Serving humane washed meat, dairy and eggs under the sham of regenerative farming betrayed animals, the planet and kind customers.
Some might argue that the owners were just trying to survive financially, but let's be honest, Rick, there's a way to be innovative as a vegan business without compromising your values. Plenty of vegan businesses have faced challenges and found ways to adapt without turning to animal exploitation.
Exactly. This wasn't just a financial decision, it was a moral failing. The closure of Sage isn't just about a restaurant shutting down, it's a reminder that when you stand up for animals, you have to stay consistent. You can't compromise and expect people to stick by you.
And the truth is, there's a growing demand for vegan food. The restaurant could have leaned into that demand, doubling down on its plant-based roots and exploring creative ways to thrive in a tough market. Instead, they alienated their most loyal customers.
Let this be a lesson to businesses that cater to the vegan community. We're not just here for good food, we're here for the animals, the planet, and the principles that define the movement. Betray that and you lose the trust that's so vital to your success.
Well said, Rick. For every vegan business out there, let this story serve as a reminder. Stay true to your values, because in the end, the animals and the people who fight for them deserve better.
Our next story is one that hits close to home here in Australia. The Victorian Kangaroo Alliance is calling for urgent action to stop the brutal killing of kangaroos at Cardinia Reserve Park. Mackenzie, this is just beyond horrifying.
It really is, Rick. Over the past few months, multiple kangaroos have been found dead, their bodies showing signs of being killed by firearms and vehicles. These aren't just accidents. This is a deliberate, targeted, violent attack against kangaroos, our national icon.
And the location makes it even worse. These killings are happening near a playground in a family park, a place where children play and go to connect with nature. Imagine the trauma of a child stumbling across one of these gruesome scenes.
The Victorian Kangaroo Alliance, or VKA, has been working tirelessly to bring attention to this issue. They've even offered a $10,000 reward for information leading to the perpetrators, but so far, no one has been held accountable.
It's appalling. The fact that this is happening at all is a testament to the lack of security and oversight at the park. The VKA's investigation revealed significant gaps in security, gates left open, damaged barriers, and a lack of functional cameras. These vulnerabilities are essentially an open invitation for this kind of cruelty to go unpunished.
And while the VKA has proposed solutions like upgraded cameras, secure gates, and better surveillance, Parks Victoria has yet to act decisively. This inaction only adds to the outrage felt by the community, who are desperate to see these kangaroos protected.
Let's not forget, Mackenzie, kangaroos are more than just a symbol of Australia. They're sentient beings who deserve to live free from harm. What's happening at Cardinia Reservoir Park is a microcosm of a much larger issue, the systemic disregard for the kangaroo population in this country.
Exactly. From mass killings for commercial purposes to these horrific acts of violence, kangaroos are constantly under threat. And yet they're cherished by so many Australians and tourists alike. It's a bitter contradiction that needs to be addressed.
It's time for Parks Victoria, Melbourne, Water and other authorities to step up. Enhanced security measures are an urgent necessity, but so is a broader conversation about how we value and protect wildlife.
This story is a stark reminder of how vulnerable our kangaroos are, even in spaces where they should be safe. If you're listening and feel as outraged as we do, consider supporting groups like the Victorian Kangaroo Alliance or joining community watch efforts. Together, we can demand justice and better protections for these incredible animals.
Well said, Mackenzie. Our national icon deserves more than lip service. They deserve real action, real protection, and above all, respect.
Our next story highlights the dark world of wildlife trafficking, a global crime that doesn't get nearly enough attention, Rick. A Sydney woman has been arrested and charged after authorities intercepted international mail packages containing 19 blue-tongue lizards.
That's right, Mackenzie. This isn't an isolated incident either. In December, another woman was arrested for trying to export 94 live reptiles to Hong Kong. And just last month, a man was sentenced to over 3 years in prison for attempting to smuggle nearly 100 Australian reptiles overseas.
These are shocking numbers, but they're just the tip of the iceberg. Wildlife trafficking is a massive multi-billion-dollar black market, the fourth largest criminal market in the world, valued at $37 billion annually. And Australia's unique wildlife, like blue-tongue lizards and skinks, is highly sought after by international buyers.
What's truly heartbreaking, Mackenzie, is the cruelty involved. These animals are often drugged, stuffed in tiny containers, hidden among everyday items like socks, fishing tackle boxes, or coffee mugs. Many of them don't survive the journey. And for what? Profit at the expense of sentient beings.
It's absolutely cruel, Rick, but there is some hope here. Australian authorities have stepped up their efforts significantly over the past 18 months. Parcel interceptions at the border are up by a staggering 545%. Arrests have tripled and the number of animals rescued has also tripled.
That's encouraging, Mackenzie. Minister for the Environment, Tanya Plibersek, highlighted these efforts, saying the government is determined to stamp out this trade. It's a strong message, and the recent arrests show that these traffickers will face the full force of the law.
But as much as we need enforcement, we also need awareness. A lot of people don't realise how their actions, like buying exotic pets, fuel this cruel industry. If there's no demand, there's no market.
Exactly. The illegal wildlife trade isn't just a crime against animals, it's a crime against ecosystems. Many of these species are critical to their environments, and their removal can have devastating ripple effects.
If you want to help, there are things you can do. Support conservation efforts, never buy exotic animals, and report any suspicious activities related to wildlife. Every small action counts in fighting this cruel trade.
And let's remember, these animals don't belong in glass tanks or someone's private collection. They belong in the wild, where they're free to live as nature intended.
Absolutely, Rick. Let's hope these arrests are just the beginning of a stronger global effort to end wildlife trafficking once and for all. Let's now talk about a bold new campaign that's making waves on the London Underground. Ads for the documentary I Could Never Go Vegan have been popping up at major stations, and they're challenging commuters to think about their food choices in a way that's impossible to ignore.
This campaign is genius, Mackenzie. One ad shows a couple at a fancy restaurant confronted with a live chicken on their plates. The slogan asks, Could you do it? It's such a powerful visual because it forces people to confront the disconnect between their actions and the consequences for animals.
Then there's the ad featuring a man holding a coffee in a barn with a cow, alongside the question, why would a human adult drink the milk made for a cow's calf? It's a simple yet deeply thought-provoking question that highlights just how normalized this bizarre practice has become.
What I love about these ads is how they cut straight to the heart of the issue. Most people would never personally kill an animal for their food, nor would they willingly take milk from a mother meant for her baby. Yet they pay for it every day without a second thought.
That's the disconnect Thomas Pickering, the filmmaker behind the documentary, wants to address. He's taken all the common arguments against veganism, like B12, the cost, and the idea that farmed animals live a good life, and explored whether they actually hold up under scrutiny. Spoiler alert, they don't.
And it's not just the content of the documentary, it's the way it's being presented. These ads aren't preachy, they're challenging. They invite people to question their assumptions and think critically about their choices. That's the kind of conversation we need to be having.
And what's exciting is that this campaign coincides with the film's release on streaming platforms in the UK and the US. With appearances by environmentalist George Monbiot, powerlifter Sophia Ellis, and health professional Dr. Shireen Kassam, this documentary is packed with credible voices.
Not to mention, Alicia Silverstone is one of the executive producers. She's described it as the vegan documentary we've all been waiting for. And honestly, Mackenzie, the timing couldn't be better. People are more curious about veganism than ever before, and campaigns like this push that curiosity into action.
This campaign is a reminder of the power of storytelling and visuals. By placing these ads in one of the busiest cities in the world, they're reaching people in their everyday lives, forcing them to reflect, if only for a moment, on the choices that they make and the impact those choices have.
And for anyone listening who ever said, I could never go vegan, this film is for you. It's not about guilt, it's about understanding the disconnect, the system, and the power we have to create change.
Exactly. If you haven't already, check out I Could Never Go Vegan. Whether you're vegan, curious, or skeptical, it's a film that challenges all of us to think deeper about the choices we make every day.
And let's hope campaigns like this continue to spark the conversations that lead to a more compassionate world. Let's wrap up today's episode with something uplifting: the incredible rise of Indian vegan cuisine. Mackenzie, who doesn't love a good Indian meal? And now, more than ever, eating vegan the Indian way is not only healthier, but also tastier than people might think.
You're so right, Rick. Indian food has always been a treasure trove of plant-based options. Many traditional Indian dishes are naturally vegan, packed with flavour made from wholesome ingredients and often rooted in family recipes and traditions that go back generations.
Exactly. What's happening now is a blending of the traditional and the modern. People are realizing how easy it is to veganize classic dishes or incorporate contemporary ingredients like quinoa and millet into recipes.
And it's not just home cooking. Indian restaurants and street food vendors are embracing this plant-based wave too, offering dishes that cater to both traditional palates and adventurous eaters.
What I love about this movement is how accessible it is. Indian food is inherently rich in plant-based proteins like lentils and chickpeas. Add to that the vibrant spices and diverse cooking styles from across India, and you've got a cuisine that's both satisfying and nourishing.
Let's not forget the health benefits, Rick. A well-planned vegan diet is rich in fibre, antioxidants, and essential nutrients, making it fantastic for preventing and managing chronic illnesses like heart disease and diabetes. Indian cuisine, with its focus on whole grains, legumes, and vegetables, fits perfectly into this framework.
So if you're listening and haven't explored Indian vegan food yet, do yourself a favour and dive in. Indian vegan food truly shows how plant-based eating can be sustainable, delicious, and culturally rich. So let's celebrate this growing movement and take inspiration for our own plates. And that brings us to the end of this episode of the Vegan Compass podcast. We've covered everything from heartbreaking stories of animal cruelty to inspiring progress in the vegan movement.
As always, thank you for joining us and for caring about these important issues. Whether it's challenging beliefs, supporting wildlife protection, or celebrating delicious vegan food, every step we take together makes a difference.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please share it with your friends, leave us a review, and let us know your thoughts. Together, we can continue to navigate toward a kinder, more compassionate world.
Until next time, keep shining a light on injustice, celebrating progress, and living with compassion. Take care, everyone.
Thanks for listening to the Vegan Compass podcast, unveiling truths, inspiring change.
Be sure to follow us on social media at @thevegancompass_podcast. See you next time.